I break down the release time, which is pretty much identical to mine.
Do I need to call you the female version of Steph Curry, or do I need to call Steph Curry the male version of Caitlin Clark?
3 million viewers. That's how many people tuned in to watch Caitlin Clark in the Big Ten Championship. But here's the kicker. Clark's not just drawing eyeballs, she's changing the game, just like Steph Curry did. How exactly? Stick around as we break down the parallel journeys of these two basketball phenoms. Let's rewind the clock and take a look at where it all began for these two sharpshooters. Caitlin Clark's journey to stardom started way back in high school. She wasn't just she was a 5-star recruit, one of the top 5 players in her entire class. Everyone wanted a piece of Clark, and for good reason. But here's where things get interesting. Stephen Curry, he wasn't even close to that level of hype. Curry was a 3-star prospect, the kind of player big schools often overlook. He ended up at Davidson College, a small school that most casual basketball fans had never even heard of. So right off the bat, we've got two very different stories. Clark walked into college with sky-high expectations. Curry, he had to prove himself from day one. But here's where their paths start to converge. Both players faced some serious skepticism about their shooting styles. People looked at Curry and thought, he's too small, he'll never make it in the big leagues. And Clark, her deep shooting range had folks scratching their heads. It just wasn't how women's basketball was supposed to be played. But you know what they say, haters gonna hate. And these two, they just kept shooting. Clark hit the ground running at Iowa. From her very first game, it was clear she was something special. She started breaking records left and right, putting up numbers that made even the most seasoned basketball analysts do a double take. Curry's rise was a bit slower, but no less impressive. He turned Davidson from an unknown school into a Cinderella story. Remember that Elite 8 run in 2008? Curry was the talk of college basketball, dropping jaws with every game. Now, let's talk about impact. Clark has taken the Iowa Hawkeyes to new heights. We're talking about their best stretch in program history. NCAA championship game appearance? Check. Final Four? You bet. She's not just scoring points, she's elevating her entire team. Curry did the same thing at Davidson. He took a small school and put them on the national map. Suddenly, everyone knew about the Wildcats, and it was all because of this skinny kid with a killer jump shot. But here's where Clark's story gets really wild. You know, things are heating up when Stephen A. Smith starts talking. And boy, did he have something to say about Clark. He straight up said she has the potential to score in an NBA game. An NBA game. That's the kind of praise you just don't hear every day. Now, let's talk numbers, because in basketball, numbers don't lie. Clark recently became the NCAA Division I all-time leading scorer. The previous record holder, Pete Maravich. Yeah, she's that good, but it's not just about individual achievements. Both Clark and Curry have transformed their college programs. Iowa's selling out every home game for the first time in history. They're setting attendance records left and right. People aren't just coming to see Clark, they're coming to see what she's built. Now let's talk about how Caitlin Clark and Steph Curry are completely changing the game of basketball. These two aren't just great shooters, they're redefining what it means to take a good shot. Remember when coaches used to yell at players for shooting from too far out? Well, Clark and Curry are making those coaches eat their words. They're not just taking long shots, they're making them at an incredible rate. And think about it, most players are taught to get as close to the basket as possible before shooting. It's all about high percentage shots, right? But Clark and Curry, they're proving that a shot from half court can be just as good as a layup. Here's the thing, it's not just about making highlight reels. These deep shots are changing how the entire game is played. Defenses have to stretch out to guard against these long-range bombs. That opens up the court for their teammates. Suddenly, there's more space for everyone to operate. But don't just take my word for it. Some of the biggest names in basketball are taking notice. Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most dominant players ever to step on a court, called Caitlin Clark the best female collegiate player ever. That's high praise coming from a legend like Shaq. And it's not just talk. Clark's shooting is forcing opponents to completely rethink their defensive strategies. How do you guard someone who can score from anywhere on the court? It's a nightmare for coaches trying to game plan against her. Curry's faced the same challenges in the NBA. Teams have had to come up with entirely new defensive schemes just to try and slow him down. And even then, he often finds a way to get his shots off. Here's where it gets really interesting. Curry himself has noticed the similarities in their games. He said Clark's release time is pretty much identical to his. That's not a coincidence. It's a testament to the hours of practice both players have put in to perfect their craft. But it's more than just technique. Both Clark and Curry have that special something, that confidence to take shots that would make most players and coaches cringe. They're not afraid to pull up from the logo, even with a defender in their face. And you know what? It's working. Clark recently broke the record for the deepest three-pointer in women's college basketball history. We're talking about a shot from 35 feet out. That's not just deep, that's in another zip code, and this is where Clark's game really connects with Curry's influence on basketball. Before Curry came along, a shot like that would have been considered insane in a professional game. Now, it's becoming more and more common. But here's the real kicker. These aren't just lucky shots. Clark and Curry practice these deep threes relentlessly. They've turned what used to be considered a bad shot into a legitimate weapon, and in doing so, they're changing how basketball is played at every level. Now, think about the impact this has on young players. Kids watching Clark and Curry aren't just seeing amazing shots. They're seeing a whole new way to approach the game. They're learning that with enough practice and confidence, those impossible shots can become possible. All right, let's talk about the ripple effect these two sharpshooters are creating beyond the hardwood. Caitlin Clark and Steph Curry aren't just changing how the game is played, they're transforming the entire landscape of basketball. First up, let's look at the numbers. The Big Ten championship game between Iowa and Nebraska. It was a ratings slam dunk. Over 3 million viewers tuned in, with a peak of 4.45 million during overtime. That's not just good, it's historic. We're talking about the most watched women's college basketball conference tournament game ever. But it's not just about one game. Clark's electrifying play is putting butts in seats and eyes on screens consistently. She's creating a buzz around women's basketball that we haven't seen in years. People aren't just watching, they're getting excited, they're talking about it, they're coming back for more. Now, let's compare this to Curry's impact on the NBA. When he burst onto the scene, suddenly everyone was talking about the Golden State Warriors. Jersey sales skyrocketed, ticket prices went through the roof, and TV ratings soared. Curry didn't just change the game, he made it must-see TV. But here's where Clark's story gets even more interesting. Her success isn't just good for college basketball, it's pushing for real change in the WNBA. We're talking about better travel arrangements for teams. It might not sound like a big deal, but trust me, it is. For years, WNBA players have been dealing with long commercial flights and tight schedules. It's not just uncomfortable, it affects their performance on the court. But now, with stars like Clark on the horizon, things are starting to change. More chartered flights, better schedules, it's all part of elevating the women's game to where it deserves to be. Think about what Curry did for the NBA's global popularity. He made basketball cool in a whole new way. Kids all over the world started mimicking his shooting style, his celebrations, his whole vibe. Now, we're seeing the same thing with Clark. Young girls are watching her play and thinking, I want to do that. But it goes even deeper than that. Clark is showing that women's basketball can be just as thrilling, just as competitive, and just as worthy of attention as men's basketball. She's not just bridging the popularity gap, she's obliterating it. Remember when we talked about Clark breaking records? Well, those achievements aren't just numbers on a stat sheet. They're conversation starters. They're reasons for people who've never watched women's basketball to tune in and see what all the fuss is about. And here's the kicker. Once people start watching, they're hooked. They're seeing the skill, the competition, the pure excitement of the game. Clark isn't just a great player, she's an ambassador for women's basketball. Think about the long-term impact here. More viewers mean more revenue. More revenue means better resources for teams and players. Better resources lead to an even higher level of play. It's a positive feedback loop that could elevate women's basketball to new heights.